For decades, tanks dictated how wars were fought. Heavy armor and massive firepower made them nearly unstoppable. But today, that power looks fragile. Tanks now face threats they were never designed to survive. Tiny drones that fly low and hit hard, guided missiles from afar, mines and IEDs hidden under roads. Tanks adapted, layered armor, reactive protection, active defense systems. But weapons evolved too. Each defensive breakthrough triggered smarter, cheaper ways to destroy them. What used to cost millions can now be done with a few $100s and a remote control. This is no longer about brute force, it's about survival. And right now, tanks are struggling to survive. Tanks were built to stop bullets and shells. But by the mid-20th century, infantry got a simple solution, the RPG. Cheap, portable, and easy to use, it changed everything. Suddenly, one soldier could destroy a multi-million-dollar machine with a single shot. RPGs fired shaped charges, warheads that focused explosive force into a narrow jet capable of burning through steel. The RPG-7 became legendary. Used in nearly every conflict since Vietnam, it proved terrifyingly effective. In Afghanistan, Mujahideen fighters used RPGs against Soviet tanks with deadly results. In Chechnya, RPGs claimed dozens of Russian armored vehicles, often in brutal urban battles where ambushes were easy to set up. Tanks responded with better armor, sloped plating, composite materials, and eventually explosive reactive armor, ERA. ERA was a game changer. When hit, these blocks exploded outward, disrupting the shape's charge and protecting the tank. For a while, that worked. But weapons evolved. Tandem warheads were the answer. Two charges. The first defeats the reactive armor. The second punches through what's left. Suddenly, ERA wasn't enough. Modern RPGs like the RPG-29 carry these tandem warheads. In Iraq, an RPG-29 managed to penetrate the side armor of a British Challenger II, one of the most heavily armored tanks in the world. Tanks adapted again. More layers, better materials, complex armor packages. Still, RPGs remain deadly. Even older RPG-7s are everywhere. They're cheap, easy to use, and in close quarters, extremely effective. In cities where tanks have limited mobility and lines of sight, RPGs become even more dangerous. Attackers can hide above, below, and behind, angles tanks can't easily cover. Top armor, hatches, optics, all vulnerable. A single well-aimed RPG can disable the tank or force the crew to abandon it. So while RPGs might seem old, they're far from obsolete. In urban combat especially, they remain a serious and persistent threat no tank crew can afford to ignore. If RPGs made tanks vulnerable at close range, anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs, brought danger from much farther away. Early ATGMs like the American Tobu and Soviet Konkours were revolutionary but flawed. They were slow, wire-guided, and required operators to keep targets in sight until impact. Skilled tank crews could sometimes spot the incoming missile and maneuver to avoid it. But missile technology didn't stand still. Modern ATGMs changed everything. Missiles like the American Javelin, British NLA, and Israeli Spike introduced fire-and-forget capability. Once launched, these missiles guide themselves to the target. The operator can take cover immediately after firing. Tanks often don't even know they're being targeted until seconds before impact, or not at all. And the real killer feature? Top attack profiles. These missiles don't hit tanks head on. They climb after launch, then dive sharply to strike the roof, where armor is thinnest and active protection is weakest. This design targets the exact spot most tanks can't adequately defend, and the results have been devastating. In Syria, US-supplied TOW missiles knocked out dozens of Syrian army tanks. In Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijani forces used Israeli Spike missiles to destroy Armenian tanks from long range. And in Ukraine, javelins and NLAWs have torn through Russian armor in ambushes and defensive actions, often hitting from positions tanks couldn't even return fire toward. Tanks adapted again. Active protection systems, APS, became the next defense layer. Systems like Israel's Trophy, Russia's Afghanet, and others use radar to detect incoming threats and launch interceptors to destroy them before impact. In many cases, APS works. But not always. APS can be overwhelmed. Multiple missiles fired in quick succession, or mixed with other attacks like drones or artillery, can saturate the system, and top attack profiles, especially steep diving ones, often come in at angles APS struggles to cover. Furthermore, APS has limited ammunition. Once those interceptors are gone, the tank is vulnerable again until reloaded, something not easily done under fire. Modern ATGMs have turned the battlefield into a sniper's domain. Tanks that once dictated combat now have to constantly hide, move, and rely on outside support just to survive. The balance of power shifted. Tanks are no longer the hunters, they are hunted. Not every threat comes from above. Some wait silently beneath the surface. Mines have been part of warfare since World War I. Simple, cheap, devastating. They don't hunt tanks, they wait, and when triggered, they strike where tanks are weakest, underneath. A well-placed mine can rip apart tracks, damage suspension, or blast through the floor armor. At best, the tank is immobilized. At worst, the crew doesn't survive. But the threat didn't stop with traditional mines. In the wars of the 21st century, improvised explosive devices, IEDs, became a new nightmare. Unlike factory-produced mines, IEDs are handcrafted from whatever is available: artillery shells, fuel canisters, even household items. In Iraq and Afghanistan, they were everywhere, buried along roads, hidden in walls, placed inside dead animals. They targeted tanks, IFVs, and especially supply convoys. IEDs didn't always destroy tanks outright, but stopping a tank was often enough. An immobilized tank becomes vulnerable to follow-up attacks, RPGs, ATGMs, or artillery. It also becomes a logistical and moral burden. Recovering or destroying the tank under fire is dangerous and costly. Tanks responded. Reinforced belly armor became standard. Crew seats were redesigned to reduce blast injuries. Mine rollers and plows became common on lead vehicles. But mines evolved too. Larger charges defeated belly armor. EFPs, explosively formed penetrators, fired molten metal slugs straight into hulls. Remote-controlled and sensor-triggered IEDs bypassed simple pressure-based triggers. In modern conflicts, including Ukraine, mines once again play a deadly role. Remote-laying systems and drones can deploy mines rapidly and unpredictably. Anti-tank mines combined with sensor networks can activate only when high-value targets pass by. Mines and IEDs may seem old-fashioned, but they still do what they were always meant to do: punish mistakes. Tanks are heavy, loud, and predictable. Mines wait patiently for them to slip up. Even in high-tech warfare, this low-cost ancient threat remains brutally relevant. Tanks were never meant to fight enemies that fly. For decades, air threats meant planes and helicopters, targets for air defenses, not tanks themselves, but that calculation has collapsed. Drones have changed everything. It started with reconnaissance, small, silent quadcopters providing live video from above. Commanders could spot enemy positions and adjust fire in real time. But it didn't stop there. Soon, these cheap drones were modified to drop grenades and small explosives directly onto vehicles. At first, this was more of a nuisance than a real threat, but not for long. FPV drones' first-person view marked a turning point. Inexpensive, fast, and guided by operators with real-time video, they became precision weapons. They could fly through windows, under bridges, or straight into the rear of tanks. They didn't need powerful explosives, just accuracy. In Ukraine, FPV drones became tank killers. Thousands of videos show them striking engine decks, optics, open hatches, and even chasing tanks in motion. A few $100s in equipment routinely destroy or disable vehicles worth millions. And they're incredibly hard to stop. Too small for many radar systems, too fast and maneuverable for most active protection systems, and coming from unexpected angles, low, fast, from the rear or sides. Tanks responded as they always do. Cage armor, nicknamed cope cages, began appearing on tanks in Syria and Ukraine. Simple metal structures designed to block drones from hitting hatches or decks. Sometimes they work, often they don't. FPV pilots adapted quickly, steering drones through gaps or detonating them at weak spots in the cages. Electronic warfare followed. Signal jammers, GPS blockers, radio interference. Again, useful, but not foolproof. Some drones are pre-programmed to complete their mission even if jammed. Others switch frequencies or use autonomous flight modes. And FPV drones are just part of the problem. Loitering munitions, kamikaze drones like Lancet, Switchblade, and Shahed add another layer of danger. Lancets, used heavily in Ukraine, have destroyed or disabled hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. They loiter for minutes or even hours, waiting for vulnerable targets to appear. Once locked on, they dive at high speed, often striking from above, the tank's weakest point. Unlike FPVs, these drones don't need constant human control. They are harder to jam and nearly impossible to react to in time. Tanks are in a tough spot. Modern defenses weren't designed for constant attacks from dozens or even hundreds of cheap, precise drones. Protecting against them requires not just armor or APS, but air superiority, jammers, and drone countermeasures working together. In this new battlefield reality, drones are rewriting the rules. They are cheap, they are smart, they are deadly. And worst of all, they are everywhere. Tanks no longer fear other tanks, they fear drones. There was a time when tanks could find safety behind the front lines. Parked, hidden, resupplied. As long as they stayed out of range, artillery was little more than background noise. Old artillery relied on saturation, firing hundreds of shells in the hope that a few might land close to a target. But those days are gone. Today's artillery doesn't rely on luck, it relies on precision. Smart shells have redefined what artillery can do. GPS-guided munitions like the American Excalibur or Russian Krasnopol can hit targets with near-pinpoint accuracy. Once coordinates are fed in, often by drones, the shell flies in and adjusts its trajectory mid-flight. Even moving vehicles can be hit. A tank behind cover or camouflaged isn't immune anymore. If spotted, it becomes a target. And in modern combat, spotting is easier than ever. Small drones orbit the battlefield day and night. They see everything. Tanks rolling down roads, hiding under trees, or stop to resupply. Once detected, their coordinates are transmitted directly to artillery batteries. Fire missions today take minutes, sometimes seconds. There is little time to relocate or react. And some shells are designed specifically to hunt tanks. Bonus and Smart 155 shells carry submunitions that deploy over target areas. These submunitions float down, scanning for armored vehicles. Once detected, they fire an explosively formed penetrator straight into the tank's roof. Kamikaze drones and top attack artillery shells now serve the same purpose. Strike from above, strike where tanks are most vulnerable. Tanks responded in predictable ways: constant movement, camouflage, decoys, from inflatable tanks to fake heat signatures. But nothing is perfect. Movement exposes tanks to other threats. Camouflage is often useless against thermal imaging. Decoys only fool systems that aren't smart enough to tell the difference. In recent conflicts from Iraq to Ukraine, smart artillery has become a terrifying force multiplier. Cheap, fast, and precise. These shells make no mistakes. Once spotted, tanks often only have one option left: leave or die where they sit. Artillery was once area denial, now it's a precision assassin. For tanks, nowhere is truly safe anymore. Tanks are still on the battlefield, but they no longer own it. What once were unstoppable steel beasts are now targets in a world filled with threats they were never designed to face. RPGs from every street corner, guided missiles launched from miles away, mines hidden beneath roads and fields, drones buzzing above, cheap, smart, and deadly, artillery shells falling with precision once reserved for missiles. Tanks responded every step of the way: reactive armor, active protection systems, electronic warfare, camouflage, and constant maneuvering. But the pattern never changes. Every new defense brings new ways to defeat it. Every new weapon gets cheaper, smarter, and harder to stop. The result? Tanks have become trapped in a race they can't win alone. This doesn't mean tanks are obsolete, not yet. They remain vital for firepower, shock action, and holding ground. But their role is changing fast. The future of tanks is likely smaller crews, smarter armor, seamless integration with drones and infantry, and eventually full automation. Unmanned tanks will remove the human vulnerability, but not the threats. Because on the modern battlefield, survival isn't guaranteed by thickness of steel, it's guaranteed by adaptation, and adaptation never ends. If you want to follow how tanks, and warfare itself, continue to evolve, stay tuned. Subscribe for more deep dives into the future of combat and the technology shaping tomorrow's wars.